Hi everyone. So we're actually going to finally finish this Bloomin' map. I didn't expect it to take this long to finish it simply because I wasn't working on it full time. But we're going to speed things up. As you can see, we're going to time lapse it. So as I was designing this map, I already had sort of an idea of how I wanted the order in which the player enters rooms to be. Now, I am trying to stay within the Vanilla Doom viz plane limit, meaning that it doesn't matter how many viz planes there are in the map. It only matters how many is visible to the player at any given time. Now, later on, I'll show you me using this tool. I think it's called the viz plane viewer and also the node viewer. And those two tools will help me to understand how many viz planes are being used to produce certain structures, because these little sectors, the floors and the walls and stuff like that, those are not viz planes. Those are just sectors that indicate different height variation of ceilings and floors and stuff like that. So here I'm thinking to myself, man, I need to try to get the height of these walls and the ceilings exactly the same because it's supposed to be an outdoor scene. And then I thought to myself, let me just borrow these sectors here and just use them as a template or as a sector replacement. And so I just copied the parameters of the first courtyard, and it does save some time. It doesn't save a lot of time if you plan on making changes, because whenever you edit these original sectors, it actually affects the new ones as well, or vice versa. So it is a way to save time, but it only saves time if you plan on not really changing any of the parameters from the parent sector. But if you're not sure, it is better to draw a new sector. But there's no right or wrong way of doing it. All that matters is, how quickly can you build exactly what you want to build without putting in unnecessary amount of work. Now, as you can see here, I'm doing the same thing again. I want this sector to be cloned in another part of the map. It really is quicker just to do it this way. A lot of the stuff in this video just takes a really long time because I don't know everything exactly how I want the map to be. I'm doing a lot of guesswork. Planning is important, but the reality is that there's only so much you can plan. A lot of the stuff that you're able to do only becomes apparent once you actually start building the map. When I was making Doom Zero and a few of the other WODs that I've made in the past, I noticed that when I would do things a certain way in GZ Doom, it would not look right in vanilla. So then I would fix it in the original DOS version of the Doom engine, and I would be like, okay, everything's fine now. And then some people would point out to me, the skybox doesn't look correct. There's a sector that seems to be vanishing as the skybox moves across the screen. And I realized this was coming from people that were using PL Boom Plus. So even PL Boom Plus renders graphics a little differently from vanilla and from GZ Doom. Yeah, so trying to build a game that's compatible across all source ports is a real pain. I really don't blame people for saying their particular mod or their particular map pack only works with the very specific source ports. And, some people will whine and complain and say, well, I want to play this on my source port of choice. Well, okay. Many of us will try to do that, but some of us just don't have that much time. Now, I'm not really speaking for myself because I do try to make this compatible on every source port, but priority for me is trying to get the style of play to a certain way that will offer the most fun or the most rewarding in terms of navigational and combat experience. Now, of course, the combat would only really be defined when you start placing monsters in the map. However, you do have to think about combat even this early in development. So one of the difficult things of building a Doom map is that the way that Doom map handle skyboxes. I mean, it's not even a skybox. It's just a 2D background that scrolls horizontally as the camera rotates. It's sort of in a different plane of existence. And as a result, the way that the engine indicates through the level where the sky needs to be visible, it's a little bizarre. Sometimes you have to have multiple sectors to get the effect to actually happen. So as a result, sometimes I get a bit lost. Sometimes you'll see that I'll freeze a bit and I'll be like, wait, what was I doing? As you can see right now, I'm actually correcting a mistake I made. I was like, oh, wait, we want the wall to be visible, because it's difficult to visualize in your brain what exactly this sector does. What does that sector do? It's so much easier now that we can just go back into 3D mode and just actually see what the heck is going on. But even then, sometimes you scratch your head and you're like, wait, what was I trying to do here? If you only have one sector that has a skybox, or not a skybox, a sky ceiling, only the ceiling is going to be a sky, not the walls or anything. So if you want like a vista to look out to over a ledge or something like that, then you're going to have to add another sector, and sometimes, depending on the situation, sometimes 3 sectors. And it can be very confusing, especially when you realize that in order for the effect to even work, even if you place the right amount of sectors, you have to move the second sector below the player's field of vision, so that then the engine will be like, oh, okay, you want this to be a vista, not just a roof that has a sky in it. It's very confusing. And I really have to hand it to, the poor souls back in the 90s that didn't have something like Doom Builder to build their maps. They literally had to have a 2D map editor where you have to input through numbers the height of the ceiling and the floor, and you can't really see how things look unless you actually launch the game and go into the game. As even when it comes to textures, yes, you can select a texture, but you can't see it on the wall with other textures to see if the textures don't clash horribly with the environment. This is probably one of the reasons why a lot of people like to sort of poke fun at Sandy Petersen, saying that his maps are like really ugly. But then when you realize, well, I mean, what kind of tool was he using? I mean, he couldn't even see the textures. It's only when they test the maps. And a lot of the time, he didn't even have time to go back and make corrections, because he had to build the majority of the maps in a 3-month period for the first Doom. And even though he had more time to work on Doom 2, he had more maps to work on Doom 2, and many of them were not even already existing, made by Tom Hall. They had to be made from scratch, so it required even more time to build those maps. And some people would say, he's just not a good level designer. I don't agree with that, because I find these levels, they do flow nicer than some other levels that we get in official, like Doom expansions, as an example. Not all of them. I'm not saying he's the best level designer ever, but once they were using the game engine where they would view things in 3D, such as working on Quake, that's when level design really got really good at its software. Especially in Quake, the first Quake with episode 4, which most of those levels were done by Sandy Petersen. So, clearly the man does have a good eye for detail. It's just that, crazy thing is, if you give him enough time and not a mountain of maps to do, but only like 7 maps to do in a period of like 6 or 7 months, then of course he's going to have more time to work on the maps, and it's going to look good. And as a result, that's why Quake maps just look really good. Even the so-called worst maps in Quake are just beyond some of the worst maps in Doom. Now, again, some people might think I'm comparing it to, these 2 games from 2 different eras, 2 different engines. No, it's actually harder to build a really good map in Quake. That's why Doom modding and Doom map building is so popular, because it's so easy. The tools are easy, especially modern tools. It's so easy building maps in Doom. building good maps in Quake is harder. It's more time consuming. But all of these limitations is not an issue anymore with Doom. Now we can see the 3D environments at any time we want. We don't have to keep launching the game to test the map. We can just look in the 3D viewer. And it's not just Doom Builder, but so many other tools out there for other games that we used for modding and modern tools for developing games from scratch. Also, I mean, have you seen like the latest Unreal Engine? It's like you're in the game. You don't have to use your imagination. You're building stuff in real time. We're spoiled today. It's so easy today. But back then, it was difficult. It's a lot quicker to do things in the 2D editor, but that's only if you have a good mental grasp of what it is you're doing. But a lot of the time, I'm not even exactly sure how things look even after I punch in a bunch of numbers indicating the height of the ceiling or the height of the floor or how bright the room is and all of that stuff. I have to see the room in 3D to actually understand what it is I'm doing. So I'm not going to pretend that I'm a more talented level designer than the original developers at id Software back in the 90s, because they didn't have the tools I had. And I also didn't have to worry about visplane limits and other stuff like that. That being said, that's probably one of the reasons that motivated me to stay under the visplane limit, because just the idea of getting this game to work in the on an original DOS machine is just too appealing to me to ignore. And it has caused a lot of headaches throughout this whole time-lapse video. You'll notice that I use the visplane tools a lot, trying to figure out if the map is going over the visplanes at any certain part of the map. And it can be a pain, but when you achieve vanilla compatibility, it's actually a really good feeling, because you're like, I could totally make something that would work on older hardware. Granted, I don't use the old tools they had, but still, I have a 486 computer that I haven't worked on yet. I just have it behind my desk, just sitting there, collecting dust, because trying to build a retro computer from that era is actually really difficult. A computer from like the late 90s wasn't too bad, because at least you still had something like USB where you could just put stuff on a flash drive and just stick it into your retro computer after, installing a USB drive or something on a CD or something like that. But with a DOS era computer, USB is just not a thing, just doesn't work in DOS. So, and the problem is that you can't use the CD-ROM because you don't have a way to boot the CD-ROM, or rather to have a driver that can launch when you turn on the computer. So I have to rely on the floppy drive, which is really difficult because I'm not like LGR, I'm not a retro collector. So I have to go find floppy drives in this box with really old stuff in it that I have. And floppy drives that still work, but here's the hard part, trying to get it to work, like having a fairly modern computer. Like when I mean fairly modern, I mean like 15 years old or something like that. Something that's new enough to have flash drives, but I mean USB that I can use flash drives, but old enough that it can still communicate with a floppy drive, so that I can put some information on floppy drive, so that information on floppy, so that I can stick it in my 486 and then start installing some drivers. Then I can use the CD-ROM drive, but the CD-ROM drive would literally be my main method of putting data on my retro 486, because again, there's no USB for a computer that old. Even if I bought a USB card, it wouldn't work, because USB cards, to my knowledge, only use PCI. So it's difficult. Sometimes it's just easier just to use DOSBox. But a part of me wonders why I even try to maintain vanilla compatibility, because pretty much everyone I talk to never actually run it through like a retro machine or DOSBox or something like that. They just use their source port of choice. Nothing wrong with that. I'm just saying that's the most common practice for modern Doom fans. They just use a source port, and as a result, sometimes I do wonder to myself, why am I even doing this? Why am I even trying to stay below the visplane limit? But it really does come down to the fact that I am able to do it, that it is possible, that I do possess the, I guess you could say, mental discipline to limit myself without compromising heavily on the design of the map. It's something I want to do not just out of principle, but I guess you could say sort of future-proofing, just in case there ever is a situation where I would want to run this on a retro machine or a vanilla capable only source port like Chocolate Doom, and it turns out that was probably a good move when it comes to trying to get it to work on certain source ports. Now, granted, the source port that id Software released, that uses the Unity engine as a front end, it doesn't have a visplane limit, obviously not. But I do feel like that because I was trying to stay in vanilla, I never really ran into serious technical problems when trying to port Doom Zero to the official port from the official Doom port for modern systems and consoles and stuff. Because it's not just visplanes that I'm always thinking about; it's also complexity of motion of objects. So, for instance, one of the things that I noticed in Doom Zero is that, not Doom Zero, in Vanilla Doom, is that ceilings and floors cannot move at the same time. Only one can move and the other cannot, while the one is still moving. Whereas in modern source ports, both of them can move in many, many source ports. And that's one of the things that doesn't work in actually quite a few modern source ports. And I think the Unity engine might be one of them. I'm actually not sure about that, but at least it was something I didn't have to worry about. However, I did run into an issue where map 20 would crash, because I think it was also map 22 would also crash because there were middle textures that would be stationary, whereas the ceiling that's surrounding the middle texture or the sector surrounding it would move up, would be used like a door, and for some reason that would cause the game to crash in certain source ports, particularly in the Unity port. But it didn't happen in vanilla DOS Doom, so that's funny. So that's one of the few things that DOS Doom is able to do that a source port can't do. Another example of this would be Chocolate Doom. I actually mentioned in the past that Chocolate Doom actually did crash in places where the DOS version of Doom did not, and that's probably because Chocolate Doom, although is aiming for authenticity, I don't think it's trying to be authentic in the strictest sense. I think it's trying to be authentic in principle, meaning that if it's something that you don't see in Vanilla Doom, then the engine doesn't cater to that, even though it might actually be unintentionally possible on the original DOS version of Doom. And one example of this is that there was this random floating line def that was sort of sticking out in the void with no sectors surrounding it. And Vanilla Doom didn't have a problem with it. It was just like, oh, there's a sector. Oh, well, just ignore it. Whatever. Didn't cause any problems. But because that's something you generally don't do when you build levels, the people that developed Chocolate Doom did not account for something like that. And as a result, Chocolate Doom did crash when that were to happen. So I had to do quite a bit of searching to try to find this bug that I didn't know what was causing at the time. And this was in map, in Doom 0 in particular. This was in map 17. No, not 17. This was in map 11. That's right. Trying to get textures to line up is one thing. Trying to get lined up textures to look good is a whole other thing. First of all, yes, technically they lined up, but it just doesn't look that good. And I think a lot of it has to do with how many of these textures actually don't repeat properly. So like this metallic texture, this border metallic texture, it sort of has a gradient style or gradient look to it, and then it just sort of stops. It just sort of stops, and then it loops, and it doesn't look good. But eventually, I had to, for the sake of my sanity, I decided this time I'm just going to ignore it, since that's what most people do anyways. Here I am trying to figure out, what do we want this door to look like? Because I could just use that texture, that computer texture, but I wanted players to be like, oh, that's a door, and not be confused. Because that texture is pretty much never used for doors and stuff like that, unless it's like a secret, but this isn't supposed to be a secret. It's supposed to be yellow entrance. So I'm actually adding this sort of ceiling detailing here, not because the building really needed additional detailing. It's mostly because of shadows being inconsistent. Like, I can have shadows on the X and Y axis be diagonal, but I can't have shadows on the Z axis, meaning vertically, be diagonal. So when you have these fake shadows that imply that the sun is sort of at a 45-degree angle, that means you have these sort of 45-degree shadows. It doesn't look right when the shadow is actually cast in, a straight vertical line on a wall when it should be diagonal. And that's when I realized there's just some things you just can't do with the lighting engine of Doom. A lot of it is just faking it, but sometimes, you know when they say you fake it till you break it. Well, I break it, and that's when I realized I can't fake it anymore. So it doesn't look nice. That's why I had to make a compromise and add additional detailing to cast a longer shadow, so I don't have to worry about the shadow looking incorrect. I know that's maybe sounds a little confusing, but if you guys understand what I'm saying, it is something that is important to keep in mind when you want to create sort of fake diagonal shadows, and instead of just always having the light be 90 degrees or noonday positioning. That's easy to do because, if there's a roof on top that casts a shadow, easy. And just one sector is needed to create a shadow like that. And that's why you see it often in Vanilla Doom. So here I am building a sort of it's not like a platform heavy map. This is still a relatively small map, but I didn't just want everything to be within reach of the player. We need to give the player a reason to explore parts of the map, and that is by not having a direct line or direct path to the items that are important in the map, like a key that will let you open a door or something like that. Very often I hate it when textures cannot line up with the ceiling and the floor, and I have to prioritize. Do I line up the floor or do I line up the ceiling? I think in this case I decided to line up with the floor because that's when the textures sort of have that border that needs to meet the floor so it doesn't look unnatural, look weird and stuff. Now, what I'm doing here is I'm experimenting with using textures as creating sort of like fake lighting. I clearly do not have enough Viz planes to create shadows in the gravel pits of this courtyard. So I decided, okay, well, instead of forsaking the whole shadow thing completely, here I am doing another one of those ceiling details to get rid of those lack of diagonal shadows. But yeah, back at the gravel area, the gravel area is very complicated. There's lots of like little details in there. That's why I had to place that big dividing wall to cut off the player's field of vision, so you can't really see both parts of the courtyard at the same time, so you won't go over the Viz plane limits and therefore the game won't crash. But I still cannot go crazy with the detailing, so I can't add more Viz planes than what I already have currently. So what I ended up doing is just making look like there's some kind of shadow thing going on by using two textures that look very similar, except one is lighter than the other. And so I used the darker one to look like it's the lighter texture, only this time in shadow. And it looks terrible in the level editor, but when you run this in Vanilla Doom with 8-bit color, aka 256 colors, it does really sort of normalize all of the different shades of brown into a certain kind of shade of brown, and as a result, these two textures that look fairly different from each other don't look that different from each other when you actually play in the game, unless you're using something like a GZ Doom where you have 32-bit color support instead of 8-bit color. But that's okay. I'm not going to make something that works perfectly for every single source port out there. I think as long as the game doesn't crash, I'm happy. I'm not going to be fussy in this situation. Now, these stairs, when I had to do the shadows for these stairs, that's when it got really complicated. Now, fortunately, I could afford to put complicated sectors there because it's separated from the more complicated part of the courtyard. This courtyard has almost nothing in it, so I took this opportunity to create really elaborate shadows on stairs and these little sort of 5 feet tall platforms and stuff. I'm still trying to figure out how I want the shape to be. Now, the shape isn't just purely on aesthetic. It's also about combat. I'm thinking about, okay, well, if there's a monster above you, is it going to be a pain to try to take them out by having the platform either be too high or too close to the wall? Therefore, you can't stand further back enough in order to see the enemy on the platform. So that's why I messed around a lot with the structure, the shape of that platform. Make sure there's plenty of room in the courtyard for the player to be able to stand back so that the player can see up, to try to get the game to aim up, because of course in Doom you have an auto aim system, unless you're using a source port that lets you do manual aim with mouse look. One of the annoying things about deciding on a I guess you could say visual language of a style that you want the map to look, sometimes you kind of forget about other important details, like what are the key colors, as in like, the red key, the yellow key, the blue key, those strips of colors that you put next to a door to indicate which key you use to open the door. Sometimes I forget, these columns, even though these columns look good, they don't have a lot of room to add those strips of color. So what am I going to do? So I ended up cutting into the columns, but I used combination of textures in such a way that it's not really noticeable, that it doesn't look weird. And now here I have been really trying to think about the I guess you could say the order in which the player visits parts of this map, I did have a rough idea. I mean, you don't want to go in completely blind with no idea what you're doing, because then you're going to end up with a map that's poorly designed and nobody wants to play. But you don't have to know every single detail before you draw a single line def. You know, it's good to have an idea, but you don't have to worry too much about the little details, because you're not going to be able to anticipate all of the weird stuff that you come across during developing the map. So don't worry too much about the little details, because you'll figure something out. But you do need a generalized idea of how the map is going to play out. And I've pretty much got the foundation. I pretty much got everything here that needs to be here to have a fully realized map. Now I'm just focusing on consistency, making the map actually look nice and not bizarre or random looking. But it is difficult to anticipate some minor hiccups you might come across in terms of what you can or cannot do in navigational aspects of a map. Adjusting for monsters is easy, because you could just, oh, well, this monster doesn't work here, let me just move it. But when you need to move a room because a room isn't working, you kind of have to restructure a huge chunk of the map just because of that little change. And this is what caused me to rethink the structure or the order in which the player would visit these areas, because I really didn't want to redo those rooms to accommodate that original vision I had for the map. And the thing is that there's actually quite a lot of things you can do. It's not like I was making this really difficult on myself for no good reason. This is a very common thing that I encounter when building maps, but I always make it work in the end, because to be honest, there's a lot of things you can do in a Doom map. You don't have to conform to your original vision, or else the whole map will fall under its own weight. Like, that almost never happens. It's only a handful of times where I had to redo entire chunks of levels because of a logic oversight on my part. But in this case, so I originally wanted the player to go through the big door that is in this courtyard that I'm currently working in, you know, with the stairs here. Oh, by the way, on a side note, as you can see, I'm trying to fake the diagonal shadow without having a diagonal shadow. But you also don't want it to look really weird and stupid. So here I am just thinking, okay, if I have some shadows on the stairs and ignore the shadows on the walls, because you can't do diagonal shadows on the walls, then maybe people won't notice that the lighting actually doesn't make sense. And you know what? I think it actually works pretty well. I always admire when people make maps that have more than traditional lighting in the Doom map, because it's always impressive to see someone do very unconventional lighting in an engine that is as limited as the Doom engine. Anyways, so that big door, that was supposed to be the door that the player would come out first, but I rearranged the order in which the player explores this map, and now it's a door that you have to go in order to get to the exit of the map. So it's actually it ends up being one of the last doors that you need to enter through. In fact, you don't even need to enter through that door to finish the map. You can just ignore it, but it's there for convenience. It's there for pacing. It's there to help with, so that you don't have to run around this entire map after you've cleared out all the monsters, because then that's just bad pacing. So I give the player the ability to go through this door that will take them to the exit, which is a shortcut to the exit, and it will help with the pacing, and people will enjoy the map more. Now, I still don't have a total, complete idea of what kind of monsters I'm going to put in here, and to be honest, I'm not going to show you that process because I feel like that if I'm going to release this map, which I don't think I'm going to release it by itself. I would probably release it with a collab or something like that. I mean, there's always some kind of, megawatt collab going on, every once in a while on the, in the Doom community. So maybe I'll submit this map as part of a collab. Because I'm not going to show you where I'm going to place monsters, so that when you play this map, that it will be a surprise to you where a monster is going to be. You're not going to be like, oh, I saw this in the video, I know where the monsters are, and then the surprise is gone. So here I am working on these columns, trying to make it look coherent, but also giving plenty of space for the blue texture on the side, but still maintain that octagon the structure of the column. It's supposed to be a column that exists indoor and outdoors. So the column, you see most of it outdoors and you see just a little bit of it indoors. And you might think this is an unnecessary detail. It isn't, because it does add detail in a room that actually is lacking a lot of. Ultimately, I'm glad that I ended up doing this. Didn't plan for it. It just worked out that way. So yeah. At this point, I'm now pretty certain how this map is going to play out. And that's why I changed the color of the doors to blue. And you'll see me, I don't know, I haven't been paying attention if I already placed the key. I think I did already place the key. Either I've already done it, but I placed the yellow key on the left side of the courtyard, and then I realized the problems with the map, and so I swapped the keys around with where there's going to be 2 keys in this map, and that just a little thing can fix this major issue I was having with how does the player explore this map, because again, you don't want the player to just walk into the courtyard, clear out all the monsters, and then there's like nothing for you to do while you find keys and open doors and stuff like that. You kind of want the player to explore the map at the same pace at which you're killing monsters. You don't want to be too much downtime where you're not doing anything, where you have that sort of ghost town feel about it. Here I am trying to resolve the visplane issue. As you can see, so much of the map is visible when you stand in the southern part of the map and look north, and the game will crash as a result. One of the most annoying things about the not so much the tool itself. The tool is actually very precise. It's that I don't know if it's Vanilla Doom in general or just Chocolate Doom, but you can't actually work right up to the limit of how many visplanes you can have at any given time. You actually have to be maybe 5 or 8 visplanes below the max. So the max is 128, but 120, 122, 23, something like that. That's as far as you should take it, because for some reason the renderer of the Doom engine in at least in Chocolate Doom is slightly imprecise compared to the tool, the visplane tool in Doom Builder. So, I mean, it might have something to do with the fact that Doom doesn't use floating point numbers, whereas modern 32-bit applications do. When I mean 32-bit, I literally mean 32-bit. Like, yes, we're now in the 64-bit era, but this tool was designed for 32-bit computers as well. When I change the height of the windows, I always make sure that they are 3 full steps high plus 1 pixel high, because the Doom guy can climb onto something that's 3 steps high, but he cannot climb on anything that is even a pixel higher than that. I like having really low windows so that the player can actually see outside the window and not have a lot of the player's field of vision being impaired. Again, I'm running into these diagonal shadows issues, so I'm like, all right, I'm going to have to put in a column here so that I've got something that's casting a massive shadow. Because you can't have a shadow just sort of end different to the floor. The shadow on the floor and the wall, they need to meet up exactly at the same spot. That's just how it's supposed to be. Here I am still trying to figure out how do I want this door to look, because I realized that, you know what, even though it may be obvious to me, there's always someone out there that finds some of your level design elements cryptic, because people don't think the way that you do. Sometimes what is obvious for you is not obvious for other people. And that's when I realized, I think I'm just going to have to put a door there instead of a computer texture so that people know it is absolutely a door and nothing else. So I'm just adding a guardrail here, so that the player has a reason to go around through the gravel to get to that key. But that means I'm going to have to build some stairs. So here we are building some stairs. And fortunately, most of this is happening behind this wall that cuts off your, I guess you could say, your field of view, so that I can have more viz planes. But that being said, I still didn't want this to be too complicated. Sometimes I fret over the dumbest details, like, for instance, when it comes to the stairs here, I'm just using that VizPlane tool constantly, trying to see which one uses less VizPlanes, because even though I'm under the limit at the moment, I'm actually always trying to make sure that I'm as efficient as possible, so that in the future, when I actually do run out of VizPlanes, that I don't have to go back and start deleting things, but instead I can just be confident and say, well, I've done the very best I can, therefore I shouldn't reach that VizPlane limit. But if I do, and it does happen sometimes, then I'll just do something like add a wall to cut off the field of view from the player from certain angles, so that you don't run over that VizPlane limit. Here I am adding these sort of floors. They used to be just there for detailing, but I've decided to turn it into sort of a monster closet type thing, where you have these monsters coming out because these things open as you approach them. So yeah, that's one thing I did spoil in terms of monster encounters. But, you know, what kind of monsters am I going to put in there? I might be really cliche and just put an imp in there or a bunch of zombies, but who knows? Maybe I'll throw in there, I don't know, a revenant just to be a troll. Actually, I'm not going to do that, because even though this is a one-off map, I do want to maintain the quality that I'm known for in my small circle of friends, because I want people to enjoy my maps, even these insignificant maps that I'm not really going to do anything with. Like, I'm not going to turn this into another Megawatt. I know that people want me to make another Megawatt, but what I really want to do with my life is actually to become a game developer full time. And you know, in between finding work and jobs and all of that stuff, especially my programmer brother-in-law, he's actually my brother-in-law. He's a very good programmer. He's actually got a master's degree in electrical engineering, and that definitely includes very low-level programming. Unfortunately, he's run out of, not completely, but he's kind of running out of money. So he has to now get back into working in a normal job. So development on Falconet has slowed down quite a lot. So I'm taking this opportunity to work on things that I wouldn't have had time to work on. But even I don't want to spend a lot of time working on Falconet. But that is ultimately what we want to do. We want to make games full time. And this is why I want to focus my efforts more on Falconet and get that game released, so that we can make some money, so that we can make more games. And you know, if I have more free time, because now we having revenue coming in, then who knows? I might actually build another Megawatt. And now Doom Zero was purely vanilla, and I think I really pushed vanilla as far as anyone can. There's literally only a handful of people that's been able to push vanilla much further than people knew that the engine was even capable of doing. I think probably the most ambitious stuff, to my knowledge, would probably be back from Back from Saturn X, or Back to Saturn X. I started playing it and I was astounded by the detail, but what blew me away is that it ran in vanilla Doom and it didn't crash. So I'm like in total awe of how they were able to put so much detail in the maps, and yet the game doesn't crash. Now, granted, I haven't played through the whole Megawatt, so I don't know if that's true for all of the maps, but the first map, which, by the way, still has a ton of detail in it, it didn't crash. So there's still people out there that are at least trying, maybe not intentionally, but are trying to keep a certain aesthetic by not going too detailed in the levels, which helps maintain that compatibility with vanilla style engines like Chocolate Doom, source ports, not engines. Now, texture alignment, my favorite thing to do. That's both sarcastic but also kind of ironically true, because when you get textures to line up in a very certain way and it just looks really cool, you're sort of like, I'm glad I did that. But while you're doing it, it is a pain. You're like, oh, it's so annoying. Why doesn't, this texture is actually very difficult because nothing lines up. Because, how you lay bricks, how the second row of bricks are not lined up with the first row of bricks. It's like that. You see these compartments of this computer server are not orthogonal. They almost have they're like a brick layout where one border of a row of computers is actually in the middle of a computer rack rather than being on the border of that rack also. So trying to line everything up and not have like one of those racks just randomly just end and it looks stupid. So difficult. I'm actually quite surprised that the original artists did that and thought that was a good idea. I bet the level designers were like, this texture sucks. And so as a result, most of the time they just don't care. There's a lot of misaligned textures in Vanilla Doom, and you can't blame them. I mean, who can? It's a pain. It really is. This was also during the time when you couldn't line up ceiling and floor textures like you can wall and just wall textures actually. Now, of course, in more advanced engines, they do let you change the alignment of the floor texture and ceiling texture, like with not just GZ Doom, but it's called GZ Builder or Doom Builder, whatever. It's like an off-brand offshoot of Doom Builder too. And it's more advanced, but I like using the original Doom Builder because it shows me what I absolutely can or cannot do in Vanilla Doom. And here I am just figuring out how do we get the stuff to line up. So it looks okay now. I just don't like that one set of like one step is the only one that has lights and the rest don't. It just looks stupid. So I decided to divide the ceiling light into just a little light with a cluster of little light bulbs and stuff instead. And so I have done this before in the past when I just get frustrated with adding lights that where the textures don't clip in the wall and stuff and look stupid. Anyways, but I did make a mistake here as I moved. Sometimes I do this and I don't realize I do this. When I move the upper textures, I accidentally move the lower textures. In other words, where the stairs are. So the stairs will be misaligned and I have to fix the stairs. I'll go back to it later. I won't do it now because I didn't notice it at this point in building the map. Now here I am just trying a whole bunch of different textures because those were just placeholder textures. I wasn't going to keep those. And don't you hate it when you kind of get used to your placeholder textures that nothing looks good? And you're like, I don't want to go back to the placeholder texture. It's already an overused texture. And I'm just trying a whole bunch of stuff. And eventually I found something that I think looks okay. And I'm like, good enough. I'm just going to use that. But then if you have like brown walls and brown ceilings and stuff, it doesn't look nice with the blue carpet. The blue carpet clashes horribly with brown. That's why I usually use like a pale sort of tan or gray texture when I'm using blue carpet. But in this case, I like these textures too much. So I've decided that, you know what, I'm just going to change the carpet and make it, I think I made it into a gray, not gray, into a beige tile set. Here I am just seeing, aren't there like better, more interesting textures I can use? Eventually, I just throw my arms up in the air and I'm like, well, I guess I'm just going to keep using Star Tan again. Because I would, Star Tan just works with so many textures. And what's nice is that if the color's not right, that's okay, because they've got one in beige, they got one in green, they've got, you know, one that's both beige and white. It's so easy to work with. The only thing that sucks is that when you're dealing with diagonal walls like this, oh my goodness, the texture alignment is an absolute nightmare when you're using diagonal walls. Because if anyone understands hypotenuse, what that is, it's not 2-to-1 or 4-to-2 or 4-to-1 or what. It's not a nice even number. It's a really bizarro number. So that's when I realized I'm going to have to dissect these textures and move them around so that they at least look lined up. Here I am experimenting some more with variations of textures of the ceiling, because if you have a sector that's different from the rest of the room, you might as well change the ceiling color, or not color, the texture of the ceiling and maybe the floor if you feel it's necessary, because it's free detail. Like nothing, all of the stuff I'm doing to the game doesn't add more complexity to the map, but adding more complexity to the texturing does give the illusion of more detail than there actually is. So here I am. So I remember this. My thought process is that, I hate that little texture just clips into the other one and it just doesn't look nice. But then I realized, you know what? I don't think most people are going to notice. Let's just forget about it. So my OCD sometimes can get unbearable sometimes. But there are times when it is absolutely necessary. And I think here in the computer console area, it is necessary. I really needed to have it look good. But fortunately, I do have that metallic border, and that border means you don't have to have the tiles match the corners, because, you know, it doesn't touch the corners. But boy, like trying to have something that looks good is pretty difficult and tedious and stuff. Especially when it comes to the computer monitors themselves, because there's a lot of repeating textures, and I just don't like repeating textures because humans are very good at noticing patterns, and when they see patterns in places where they really shouldn't be, then it's going to have that sort of samey, that mechanical sameness to it. Yeah, that's just my phone telling me stuff is going to happen. No, it's just a message. And of course, again, these bloomin' ceiling tiles, these lights that don't line up with diagonal walls. And sure, I could avoid diagonal walls, but like avoiding diagonal walls in a Doom map is just going to make a Doom map look so much more boring. This is the difference between Doom and other first-person shooters in the early 90s. Everything did things like with 90-degree walls and stuff like that. I mean, think about even Rise of the Triad, which actually came out, like I want to say it came out a year and a half after Doom. Rise of the Triad technically could do things that the Doom engine couldn't do, but it still couldn't do diagonal walls. It only could do 90-degree walls, and there was also no height variation of floors and ceilings and stuff like that. And as a result, that game just didn't look that good. So no, we need to use diagonal or naturally shaped structures to give that dynamic look that Doom is so good at doing. Now, eventually, I realized now I did remove that metallic border, probably because I had a better idea of lining up the textures. So make it look like it's a teeny tiny little texture. Sorry, not a texture, I mean a tile. A teeny tiny little thin tile that sort of is flush to the computer monitors. I guess it works okay. I don't remember if I settled on that. But yeah, but the problem is that with these computer consoles is that if you use diagonal walls, the texture's not going to, the bottom, like the floor textures, are also not going to line up. So you got computer monitors halfway in the wall. So you have to cut that out. You can't have that. And unfortunately, this is, in me trying to reduce viz planes, now I have to add more viz planes to get rid of these visual problems. And man, it's just so annoying. Oh yes, I remember what I did here. I made the computer be slightly recessed into the wall, and that made the texture alignment so much easier, as you can see. Eventually I'm like, look, even though you cannot see that light in the editor, sometimes you can see it in the game itself, because like I said, the game, the original Doom engine, it's before the Pentium days, so it wasn't really using floating point calculations. So sometimes the alignment of ceiling tiles and floor tiles are not absolutely accurate. So sometimes you will see a piece of ceiling texture that you're not supposed to see. I found that out the hard way, and eventually you kind of have to draw the line somewhere and just be like, oh well, I guess it's going to be there forever. But here, I think I was really making an effort to make sure that doesn't happen. But even though it might still happen, it's so difficult to get this game to run consistent across all these different source ports. Because, yeah, and as you can see, due to the awkward shape of this computer corner here, I could only fit one computer, like floor computer, in this area. So I was like, whatever, good enough. But I did not want to reuse these textures. And again, the diagonal walls, they just don't line up nicely. So I'm hoping that this grid texture here, I can maybe move that around because it could repeat and maybe people won't notice the repeating. But then there's that gradient highlight on that monitor and it looks weird. And I'm like, okay, I can't do that either. This is the nitty-gritty of Doom map building. This is stuff that most people actually don't talk about. Usually people just build a room, slap on a texture, maybe change the alignment once, and then just apply to all similarly textured walls throughout the room in the editor, and then they just kind of leave it. I don't think that's a good idea, because you are still going to end up with textures that are very misaligned. Now here I'm on the right path. I managed to get that monitor to change its shape without it looking like that it's two textures that are intersecting with each other. And of course, I don't like repeating textures, so I'm using the other computer monitor texture and trying to make it coexist with this green texture, this green computer monitor texture. And you can. I'm just removing little dots on the line defs, because I'm like, no, I'm not happy with that. No, that looks bad. No, I don't like it. And now here I'm actually finally starting to settle on something. I'm like, oh, okay, that actually does look okay. And I'm like, is this it? Am I done? Now, bear in mind, we're playing this 400% the speed, 4 times the speed. So that took me, I don't know, like 15 minutes, 20 minutes, something. I don't know. It's stupid. I cannot believe I spent so much time on such a dumb thing. But, that's a problem with someone like me, where sometimes I get carried away and I just fret over the dumb little details. All right, now here I am finally deciding that the blue carpet is not the way to go. I cannot believe I selected the green one because I was like, oh, let's try this one. Oh, no, it looks terrible. No. And here I am just being like, okay, so I definitely cannot use any earth color, not earth color, primary colors like green and blue and red. So I'm using beige and gray, and how do we do that without it looking dull and bland and stupid? Well, I think that this works pretty well. It has a nice green tint to it, and that's what I decided to settle with. Eventually, I did go back to this map just to refine a few aspects of the map, but I think that this is it for now. I'm pretty much done with the map. I'll just do a quick playthrough here so that you can see what this map looks like. Here the walls go down. I think under extremely rare conditions, when all 5 doors in this map are all open, it does have enough visplanes flowing in the map that it might go over the limit, but I haven't gotten it to go over the limit yet. Pick up the key. So that door that opens those yellow bars, it is now a lot more obvious. You can totally tell it's a door and not just a computer monitor that you can open or computer cabinet that you can open. And then we'll pick up the other key. And then we can go through this door instead of going all the way around. So thanks for watching. I don't know what I'm going to do with this map. Like I said, I have a few ideas, but I don't want to release it by itself because because I put so much time and effort into this map, I want this map to be part of something that is more substantial. So maybe I might participate in one of those community megawatt projects, but we'll see. Until next time.